I'm Terry. I'm from Toronto, actually, but now based in LA. Um, I went to Cal Arts, the California Institute of the Arts, for music composition. So and since then I've been working with like animators, filmmakers, directors on short films. I even did a theater production that was showcased at the Fringe Festival, which we were briefly talking about. But now I'm focusing more on video game, music for video games. I'm working on two indie games right now. Hopefully they'll be released soon within this year or next year. Um, Let me think. I was classically trained pianist, and then I also have a background in various world music. Like I'm active in Indonesian gamelan music, traditional Chinese music, and West African drumming. So that is present in my work that I do. Um, what are some of your proudest works? That's a good question.
Do you want to do, I'm sorry, but do you want to do number one and then like go around the room and then come back to number two? Is that, because if it is just all five, it might be like.
I know the questions kept popping up as I was answering the first one. Okay, let's move on.
Okay, so I guess I will go. Hi, my name is JooWan Kim. I'm actually from Korea. I came here when I was 20 years old, and then I did my undergrad at Berklee College of Music. At first, I thought I was going to do film scoring, but then, I met a great teacher who kind of converted me into pursuing classical music. So I did that, and towards the end of my undergrad, I didn't want to do classical music anymore, but I went to conservatory here in San Francisco for a master's. And at around that time, I actually formed this kind of like a peer ensemble type of group that has similar instrumentation with piano, but also with set drums and an MC. And I've been doing that kind of formally. We're actually a 501c3 nonprofit for about 10 years now. It's actually 11th year. We toured kind of all over. We headlined Vassar, Modfest, and then we went to Hong Kong. And then we're doing Fringe this year. And then I did, I actually wrote a musical last year for Broadway. I can't talk about the details, but so that's what I do. I'm a classically trained composer. Now I do hip hop stuff. So.
Kind of a rough time to be trying to launch a Broadway musical, huh? In the last year.
Well, they paid me, so I just wrote. I got paid. So.
That's important.
That's a good start. Okay, I'll jump in now. Hey everyone, my name is Barn Barnabas. I have been a composer since 1990. So I've just almost had my 30 years anniversary. I started in games on the Commodore Amiga. If anyone remembers that, going back that far. And I've worked on everything up until, well, PS5 at the moment, actually. So, yes, so I've been freelance for a number of years. I started a company called Bob and Barn in 2001. I ran the music department for Sony Computer Entertainment Europe for about 5 or 6 years before I did that. And before that, I was also a freelance composer working with demo scene composers. If anyone, again, going back that far from the Amiga in countries all around Europe. In terms of musical training, I was bless my mum for realizing I was both musical and very geeky, because age 7 I was enrolled in the youngest member of a computer club, which is the town where I was from, and given piano lessons. I went to musical school. I did a degree in music. I studied composition, and I spent all of my free time in the computer room, learning to program a Commodore PETs and Commodore 64s, in fact, at the time. So yes, slightly more information you probably need to know, but about my teenage years are barren of any female attention whatsoever. But in terms, I learned a hell of a lot about how to write computers and music, and then someone showed me in the late 80s why don't you mix the two together? And back in those days, a games composer was incredibly technical. Obviously, it still is a technical job, but some of the stuff that people were showing me was literally writing music on Commodore 64 in hexadecimal. So, you know, it's the hardest thing in the world to debug a page full of hex. But I knew how to use this stuff, and so it gave me a head start. And my first game was a game called SWIV on the Amiga in 1990, and I've done other stuff ever since. I could waffle on for ages, but I think probably in terms of introducing myself, that'll do for now.
Great. Really good to meet you all. I guess I'll go since I'm last. So my name is Christopher Tin. I am a composer living in Los Angeles. In the games world, I'm probably best known for my work with the Civilization series. I wrote the theme songs for Civilization 4 and Civilization 6, as well as Civilization Online, and I did work on Civilization World, another upcoming Civilization branch as well. So I'm very known with that franchise in particular. My most popular piece is probably a song called Baba Yetu, which was the theme song for Civilization 4, which became a bit of a choral hit actually, and sort of launched a side career for me in the classical choral composition world. So now I'm actually signed to Universal on their Decca label. I'm signed to Concord Publishing. Bluesy and Hawks does my sheet music. So I've launched a full career in the concert composing world, which has been very gratifying. And actually, as I'd love to discuss later on in this panel, not completely incompatible with work that you do in games, because I think of all the media arts, video game scoring is actually the most creatively flexible. Let's see, I live in Santa Monica, California. I have a studio, you can see it behind me here in Santa Monica. I love working on games. I am not as sort of proficient behind the sort of technical side of things that some of the rest of you are. You know, Andrew, you mentioned writing in hexadecimal. I can do that, man. That's more power to you. I mean, I'm just a guy who writes theme songs for games, and often I do the scores as well. But my main sort of calling card is, you know, just being a composer, not actually a person who implements the music, which is a very, very important part of the whole process that I know nothing about. So, you know, I got to say I am pretty involved with, I guess, a lot of the ways that being a game composer can branch out to other aspects of the music business, including concert work, but, you know, launching artist careers, touring, concerts, things like that. I've done a number of shows where it's been all video game music and I was a conductor of them. Some have been sort of fusions of video game music, classical music, and my own music. I think I might be able to share some insight on the various ways that game music can go beyond just gaming. So I'm very excited to be here with you all, and it's great to meet you. And for anyone tuning in, thanks for joining us. Does somebody want to moderate?
Yeah, I probably should monitor that.
I mean,
I can
I could
jump
do
in
it.
and moderate if you'd like.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. Yeah, however you want to do it.
Oh, we'll go ahead and do it this way. Sorry about
Yeah.
that. So let's move on to question 2. What is your background with composing and how did you get into it? I know everyone's introduction kind of like kind of touched upon it, but like I want you to share like what really inspired you and what, you know, like where'd you get your start? Was it a specific media or anything like that? But we'll go ahead and do Kerri, JooWan, Barn, and then Christopher again.
Okay. I think I explained a lot, but I guess I started composing because I was taking piano lessons, and instead of like reading the sheet music, I kind of just wanted to go do my own thing. And then that started branching out from there. And then I guess going to Cal Arts and getting exposed to the various, like learning about the Western instruments as well as the world music, I just really wanted to create my own thing and combine everything that I learned into like different universes. And I think that's perfect for games, because games, you're always trying to create a new world. So that's how I ended up there.
Okay, so I think that instead of me talking about how I got into composing, you know, then it's like personal story of 10 years old and listening to Beethoven Symphony No. 5. I think the more interesting thing is that how I got into where I am now, which is this weird hip hop stuff. So the process that that we follow in doing what I'm doing now with the completely acoustic instruments and then having an AMC kind of incorporated this way is called meta sampling. Meta sampling is an idea that you can actually, it's basically like, you know, extrapolating the idea of like sampling. So you have these materials that you find from the crates and then you kind of do the augmentation and then chop it up. But you could actually kind of sample idea and rationales, and then by incorporating them into your own system that you know, in this case would be, you know, classical music, or me bringing classical techniques to hip hop music, vice versa. So once you do that and you go through this reframing process, you actually come up with something new, right? So, and so it was for me to say like, F you to all this concert music world, because I was pretty serious at the time, and then wanted to find an answer. And so how I got into it was basically when I was at the conservatory doing, you know, composer's concert. It was like a, what is it, semester, every semester they do this like departmental concert and you get presented. Kind of like a little big deal. But I wanted to kind of piss off my teachers. So I did a proto piece that is what I'm doing now, which is, you know, had a peer ensemble, but at the end had an MC there. I successfully pissed off my teachers, which was my goal. And then second, unexpectedly, we got a big ass write-up on this like really respectable newspaper around the area. So I was like, okay, what happened? And my MC at the time suggested that I make an album with him. So next 6 months, I wrote a this music that I had no idea what it was. Mind you, I didn't even like hip hop at the time. I just wanted to do it to, you know, shake things up. And I got into hip hop as I was sort of serious about this. And I had a conversion experience when I encountered NWA, the After Police from the Straight Outta Compton, and I felt like I was dipped into the river of hip hop and reborn as me. So that's it. That's how I got into what I'm doing.
Brilliant, and a nice segue into me. What is my background? I did sort of vaguely, I did sort of brush on this before, but yeah, very simply, mum, bless her, realised I was very musical and very into computers. So I went to a musical school. I studied piano, oboe, violin, guitar, and it was one of those wonderful private schools. Actually, it was very, you know, it's a very important part of the school to be involved in music, rather than being like a bit of an afterthought. It was like very much thought of as that this is a very important part of your career development. And I was learning classical stuff. I was playing orchestras, playing and stuff like that. But at the same time, I was playing games and loving it and being a nerd at home, as I said before, learning to program computers. So I was starting to muck around with their recording studio. They had an original Atari ST, I think it was, running or whatever it was back in the mid 80s. And I think it was a Roland D50 synthesizer. And that was like amazing things at the time. And this was for me, it was brilliant stuff. But it wasn't until my involved in the demo scene and when I got the Commodore Amiga, but someone said to me, I started entering kind of demo scene competitions, and I won a couple, and there were guys there from the games industry, and some of them said, have you ever thought about writing music for games? Now bear in mind, I was 16 at the time. This is like a real job. I had my heroes, guys called Rob Hubbard, Martin Galway, Dave Whittaker, all the main 64 composers. I used to love listening to their music. But it never felt like this was a real job. But I did take them seriously at one point. I thought, why not? So I remember ringing up. There was a magazine, most popular magazine, I think, in the UK called Zap 64. And one summer, I just rang up every company which advertised a magazine and said, who does music for your games? Why not? Got the usual fob off, put some stuff in on this is 3.5-inch floppy disks. I will then put it on file and so on and so forth and blah. But at the same time, there were a couple of trade shows. I think they were called PCW shows at the moment, which were around September and April time. And so I would put on a suit to look vaguely professional and turn up and go around, walk around and see these various game companies. And we had to make up a company name in order to try and blag our way in for free rather than paying the entrance fee. And we made up a company name, and I'm walking around a stand. There was a company called Accolade. And they made a game called Test Drive, and they looked at our badge and said, "What?" A company name was Dense Design. we just made up from our demo scene names, and they said, "What can you design for us?" And I was like, "Oh, we do music for games." "Oh yeah. Have you got a business card?" No. "Do you have a show reel?" No. But give us the details, and we'll kind of get stuff sent to you. So that was pretty much the starting point. We went and copied floppy disks. My friend had a nice print, so we made the disc look more professional, and went around and just touted our wares. But like anything else, so much of what we do is about timing. And there was a company called Sales Curve, or one of the companies I saw. And I think it was about a month after I visited the trade show, I got a phone call from them. There was a producer saying, "We're just finishing up our new game. We're looking for music for it. Would you like to come in and play some of your music?" Okay, fair enough. Bless my mum, she had a nice musical tie, really cheesy thing to do at the time. Put on a suit and turn up to the office. Very, very, very nervous. Room for about 20, 30 developers. Most of them are older than me. I sat in front of this computer on this Commodore Amiga, and I basically loaded up. I think it wasn't even ProTrack. It was Noise Tracker at the time, which is the module tracker program, if you guys are familiar with that side of things. And I just started playing my music. And they were laughing and joking, but this one track they went quiet on. I thought that was it. I'd effed up. That was it. My word was gone. And actually, the producer tapped on my shoulders, said, "Let's have a chat," and said, "I'd like to buy this music as the title music for your game." Now, like any other part of the media world, you're only as successful as the success of the project you're attached to. And in this case, fortunately for me, this game was a big success. It was #1 for quite a while. It got good reviews. And in fact, as a lovely twist of fate, the magazine that I used to read, it had a music chart in there, and my track was #1 for 3 months. So I was like, "Get in, I've made it." And weird enough, I still get emails about it every now and then now, because it was a successful game. And that was it. I was off, and I was 17 years old at the time. And the following year, they did another game called Double Dragon, which I did, which is a conversion of an arcade game. I did the music for that, and then I had Pimple Dreams, of course. And then I got involved with a company for Virgin Interactive. I did the music for Cool Spot and Aladdin and things like that, and this is all in the early 90s, whilst I was studying for a degree in music. So it was always a bit of I was basically freelance from the age of 17 to 22, but at that point it was great fun, and loved it, but it always felt like there was a sort of like a virtual black wall between the game and me, because I didn't know anything about the game process involved. In many cases, they literally sent me a VHS cassette of the game in process, without any concept of what was going on behind it, and said, "Just write some music for this," which is very hard to do sometimes. You can't quite get the connection you'd like to get. So also, being the nerd that I was, I wanted to get involved in it. Now, the way I see games industry is, in many ways, it mirrors how film and TV used to be 50, 60 years ago, where everyone was on set, everyone was in-house. So at that point, I could become an in-house composer. This is the mid-90s in the games industry. So I basically touted my wares, spoke to a number of the companies that I'd worked for, and ended up getting offered 3 jobs, much to the annoyance of my housemates at university, and got offered 3 jobs. So I chose to go to a company in Cambridge, which is where I live now, called Millennium Interactive. Now, the games weren't particularly, well, they were reasonably well known, most well known for the James Pond titles at the time. But the reason I went there is because they built the best recording studio I'd ever seen. Now, bear in mind, I was coming from studios recording 1/4-inch tape, Ampex 456s and 16 tracks into mixing. The whole classic thing, striping track 16 with Symptin, triggering all the old school way of doing things. Now, this, for the technically aware, which I'm sure many of you are listening to this, back in 1995, this studio had built a 32-track Protools studio, way, way, way ahead of the game. I'd never even heard of a black box, and all these various other formats I'd never seen before. So it was a complete dive into the deep end. So I basically moved to Cambridge and was given the access to the studio aged 22, and having no clue how to do it. I was using Logic 2.0 on a Mac, and with Pro Tools, Nubus 888s, and having to suddenly throw myself into the world of digital audio recordings and everything else, which obviously haven't now, never. It's all de facto standard now, but back in 1995 it really wasn't. And yes, the company got bought by Sony in 1997 when we became head of music, and I left in 2001 to start Bob and Barn, which is the amusing name as our nicknames for Paul Arnold and myself. As a composing duo, and we've done that now for West. We had our 20th anniversary 20 days ago, in fact, on the 4th of June this year. So yes, and we branched out from doing games into doing film and TV as well. But I'll get more onto that later. But in terms of how I got into it, the obvious thing for me was the fact that I was technical and I was musical. And back in the late 80s, early 90s, that combination was rare. And in fact, you needed it. It was essential because a lot of composers back in those days, they weren't well, bless them, they were more like programmers who could play the violin when they were 5, but they understood the technical requirements, which most composers at those days did not. It was completely alien. But for me, it made perfect sense. So I think that was what gave me the head start. I've waffled enough. I'll move on nicely to, I think, Mr. Tim.
Well, count me as one of those composers who just does not, know about the technical side of things. I mean, of course, I know how to use my own kit, my own studio and stuff like that. But, knowing Fmod wise, all the implementation side of things, I just have managed to get by without knowing any of that miraculously. And so kudos to you for, not only being on top of all the new technology, but really just like having a grasp on it right from the get-go. I mean, I remember back in the mid-90s, like you mentioned, it was kind of like it was a very difficult thing to record music. Like nowadays, you just hit record on Logic on a channel and you can lay something down. I mean, then, like to have a 32-channel Pro Tools rig was an amazing sort of thing. I mean, the rest of us, we were just running, slaved ADATs through mixing boards, right? So good for you for doing that. I think having a technical side to your portfolio and your list of skills is a really useful thing. I don't think it's not the, like you can get by without having that technical knowledge too, working in games. There's always going to be somebody on the programming side who will help make up for your shortcomings. But I think, you're very well positioned, Andrew, to offer services on both sides of the coin. And I find that really admirable. So with regards to my own career, I was originally interested in writing for stage. I was interested in writing for musical theater. But along the way, I got really into orchestral composition all through college. I went to Stanford, and then after that, I actually went to the UK, Andrew. I spent some time at Oxford, and then I did my graduate degree at the Royal College of Music in London. And the thing that I learned being in the UK is, oh my God, the music education over there is so much better than what we have here in the States. I cannot tell you how many young composers I've met over there that just blow my mind to this day. I mean, just the level of musicianship and I think the training that you get in the UK from a very young age, such as you got, is astounding. And I wish we had that more here in the United States. And I wish we took music education more seriously in the United States. I got into game scoring because I went to my 5-year college reunion and I ran into my old Stanford roommate who became a video game designer. His name is Soren Johnson, and he designed Civilization 3 and 4. He went on to work on Spore. He's got a new company called Mohawk Games. I've been scoring all their games so far, including Off-World Trading Company, and I'm currently working on their title Old World, the 4X game taking place around, like 2,000 years ago. It's sort of like, you build an empire. It's another, 4X style game. And I never really thought about game composing as a avenue until it just sort of landed on my lap. I know that there are a lot more ways that one can break into the industry now. I think, going to GDC, for example, just meeting indie game developers. There are a lot more avenues, I think, for getting into the business. I got in simply by pure luck, and sometimes that just happens, right? So I think, that's kind of the extent of my what I want to say about getting into games. Do we want to move on to the next question? Want to keep things flowing?
We do have a question from an attendee who wants to know what advice you would give for composers who are just beginning their careers. I know, Christopher, you were talking about how the education system in the UK was a lot better in the States, but if someone were to approach you was just like, I'm starting out. I might not be able to like get in the education elsewhere. What kind of advice would you guys offer? We could do Kerri, JooWan, Barn, and then Christopher again.
Oh, I'm always first. Well, I think like with the internet and stuff, you can learn a lot of things online. Like even the WISE course that you can take to get certified is free, and I should do that soon. But if you're just if you're curious about things, just like look it up. Try to one of the things that I think helps me is that like I'm just a naturally curious person, so I would ask people, like I would either research it, or if I had friends that I knew had the answers, I would just be like, hey, can you like help me out? Or even if I'm working with people, be like, oh, you seem like you know this really well. Just keep asking questions. And there are so many avenues online to learn these kind of things. And some of them are paid, but some of them are also free, like WISE. Also, you should learn WISE nowadays. Because I think I think you have to be technical as well as creative for composing if you want to do video games, because especially for like small indie teams, like I know I'm working with like a team of like 3 of us, and I'm gonna have to learn how to implement the music. So that's all I got.
That's going to make you 10 times more hireable than I ever am, I got to say. Like,
Also, like on all the job descriptions, there's like always like, oh, a plus if you know how to use WISE, FMOD, anything.
But I mean, this is a really good point, because honestly, like, I mean, okay, let's say you're a game developer and you put out there, hey, we're looking for a composer. How many submissions do you think you're going to get? Like,
true.
Hundreds.
Yeah, I guess it narrows down.
Hundreds. Yeah. It's absolutely just a flood of people who will try to apply for this gig, right? And, you know, so what Kerri's doing just really sets herself apart from, you know, schlubs like me, right, who just don't know how to implement the audio, right? So, I mean, it gives her a big advantage. It's worth learning if you're very interested in composing for games.
Well, that's really nice to know, because I have no idea about this stuff, because I think it's interesting. The whole panel is called Video Game and Beyond. Like, I'm definitely just beyond, because even this panel, Chip asked me, basically, Chip is the one that's running this help network, and then a friend of his commissioned me to do a project for Net Geo, and it was like a concert sort of thing. And I wrote a bunch of pieces very fast, because that's, you know, what I do. But so, you know, I think that a lot of this, unless you're gearing towards for specifically writing for games, what I could recommend people who want to be a composer, I think undergrad education is pretty necessary. For instance, like if you want to learn like triple invertible counterpoint, it's so much better if somebody is actually doing it, they're living that thing, and then you have insights that you can get from those people. And as for, I mean, this is kind of related, as for people who want to do their own thing, because I think it's now composers, if you're just learning to become a concert music person, you would have to buy into this idea of avant-garde being prescribed in a certain way in academia. So I kind of rebelled against that. And I mean, I guess I'm a success story in terms of that, because I've been doing my own thing, and I'm just doing this, making a living, doing just what I want to do. And also doesn't help, I mean, doesn't hurt that I got signed to Opus 3, which is a agency that kind of does classical people. And it was weird that they signed us. But so the way to actually be noticed is actually important, because if you want to do something that is like unconventional and you want to do a new thing, you kind of have to have people know you. So in order for you to do that, you need to probably learn to kind of like form a how to do a press release in the beginning, especially. And you know, my advice to people who want to do their own thing is that music, especially writing your own music, is gamble anyways. So if you want to have like a safe bet, you shouldn't do it, because this has been very lucky for me. And then even with this luck, I struggled a lot. So but if you really love music, you should go for it. But if you want to do something new, you have to treat yourself as a business. And the reason that we got 501c3 was also that we could actually apply for grants, and we got a bunch of grants, and then I wrote a bunch of grant writing and stuff. That was all by me and then my executive director. So a lot of hustle is included in this field. But if you can make it happen, there's nothing like it, because you literally do whatever you want to do. But it's kind of like having a startup without any kind of real world application other than like pleasing. Okay, so.
Okay, it's a nice segue into me. I think obviously most people have covered it already. I think for me, it's a kind of three-pronged process of how do you get into this. One, as people have already said, you've got to know your stuff. You've got in terms of, there are two sides of this. There's the, you're learning your craft, of course, your ability to create music. That's a given. Everyone assumes that you have achieved the technical ability to do that, with composition, production, and so on and so forth, making your stuff sound how you want it to sound. But as people have already alluded to here, you're going to be a lot more employable if you know the technical side. It is the most technically demanding composing field there is. There is no other way. And also, I think it's also one of those things where, because it actually can be a creative, it's actually very creative on the technical side, because you can design music systems. You can design how the music plays during a game if you understand the technical side of it. I was there when we were going from, I like to think it was pretty much wallpaper music. I like to think of it as actually it was visual icing. All icing on a visual cake. That was simply what it was. That you'd have I was coming from the background where you'd have a level of a game and you write and write a tune for it. That'd be it. And your inspiration for that tune would be what the level looks like. But the music wouldn't change. It would be it'd be like one looping track for that level. And obviously we've now, in the last 15 or so years, have moved into, I like to think, much more music, which is much more event driven. We're trying to effectively allude to a good dubbing engineer on a film where you're riding the emotional curve. But the complicated thing there is ultimately, as a player, you're trying to make a bit of computer hardware understand how your player is feeling and give them music which reacts accordingly to that. That's an incredibly difficult thing to do. But of course, and you cheat a lot. You do a lot of things like, if the player's energy is pretty low, let's give him some impetus music because he's going to get his ass kicked very quickly. All these little tricks are. If the player is surrounded by 25 enemies and he's got much health, let's make that music even more in your face, because he's more likely to get himself killed. But all those little tricks all come together, but you need to do that. In order to make that work, you need to understand the technical side of it. We've all talked about a Wise and F model, the two most common middleware solutions, but the way they plug into Unity, the way they plug into Unreal, all that stuff, so you can understand where the player is at any given point and play music to do that. This is all, it's a minefield of complexities, but actually it's also quite satisfying when you get it right. So that's the first side of it. That's number one. Second side of it, as JooWan has alluded to, the business side. Learn the business side. I remember it was the best piece of advice. There's a well-known composer called Tommy Tallarico, who was sort of my equivalent in the Virgin many years ago. And I met up with him a year or two before I started Barn Barn. And he said to me, "Barn, if you ever go freelance, learn the business side, because it's a given. We all know we assume that everyone on this table can do the job. But in terms of getting the work, negotiating the contracts, all that side of it, people talked about. We have a publisher now. We have an agent. We have all those bits of it, which I knew nothing about. How PROs work, ASCAP and BMI in America, POS over here. That wasn't even, that's just not a part of the way the games industry works, because there was never a performance royalty to earn. But how all this stuff works is incredibly important. How PPL works and all those other things, sync rights, all that stuff. How to learn how to not be effectively taken for a ride in a contract. the classic thing is that the games industry is quite new. Relatively speaking, it's much newer than compared to film and TV. And film and TV contracts, the way PROs work, it's all standard. People know how it goes. You can assign the copyright to the people who own it, but it doesn't matter because you're getting performance royalties. But in games, it's not the case. So it's a question of making sure that what you're signing doesn't make sure doesn't screw you over. So that because the amount of times, I mean, I had companies I'd written music for, and they would take the music and use it on another game and not pay you for it. I'm like, no, that's not how it works. Well, you sold it to us. It's not like a wall. I didn't say you were a wall you can do whatever you want with. It's a piece of music. So, but sadly, and it wasn't done maliciously, it was simply because the games industry is used to buy it. So I'm going to give a little slight tangent here. Why all this happened? Now, largely it's because in the early 90s, I was involved in various forums how to do this. The games moved from floppy disks and cartridges to CD. The biggest change that caused was the massive amount of storage you can get on a CD, which meant that your characters can talk. Rather than having text on a screen, game designers will suddenly have the ability where their main characters could have a voice. So they started ringing up voiceover companies and so on and so forth. But the voiceover companies were used to, and the actors were all used to working in TV and film. And the first thing they were saying was, "What's your TVRs? What's your royalty routes? What's all the routes that are basically I can make money from every time this is shown?" The game industry wasn't set up to do that. So I think it was ASCAP and those guys, and they made effectively they gave them a deal. They said, "Okay, we'll let you off. We'll allow you to have effectively a buyout, where you effectively pay for one use of it and you pay upon it, then obviously that's owned by it." And sadly, rather than that becoming the exception, that became the norm. So the amount of times that you'll sign a contract in the games industry, which will be a buyout. Now, I started a mailing list in the late 90s called VGM. Probably, I think it was one of the first video game audio communities. And I became the unofficial business person. And the amount of people who would sit there and call me up and say, I'm a TV composer. I've got my first game contract. What is this? And I'm like, welcome to the games industry. And it's not because it's not because it's the norm. That's people how I expect to work it. So you have to learn all these things. But it's nothing to do with your ability to write music. That was the most important thing, is that side of it, marketing, how to go do all that stuff. So that's my second thing, is learn the business side. And my third thing is get off your arse. It's so, I mean, when I started, it was I was literally writing letters, going through phone books and finding names and addresses of companies and writing physical letters to them. I could now Google it and do a mass mail out in probably 20 minutes. So it's so much easier to do it now than it was then. However, that means it's easier for me. It means it's easier for everyone else. There's 10 times more competition. So how do you stand out in a crowd? One, you can stand out by having your own unique sound, which is a brilliant thing to do, but it only works if the game you're going to work for wants that kind of music. Alternatively, you're a known entity. They've met you. They've got an idea of you, because music, as we all know, is completely subjective. Whatever all four of us here will like musically is different, and that's nothing wrong about it. But the ability to communicate that with them, with the person you're working for, and receive communication about that's completely down to a personality, which has nothing to do with your ability to write music. It's how you deal with humans. And I've seen this so many times where people have been employed because there's a sea of, as Chris pointed out earlier, you get 100 applications for a job. How on earth can you pick it? You can pick it from pitching from composers. And you might also sit there and you start recognizing some of the names who've applied for it. Oh, I've seen him, I've met him before, I like him, let's get him in, type of thing. I've literally seen that to be the reason why people have been employed, because they've made their efforts to go to GDC, go to games conferences, go to all the local indie games fest, all that stuff, and just get yourself known. That's by far the most important thing, because otherwise you're just an email, a sea of emails from budding composers who want to work on your project. But if they know you and they've got an idea that you might like that person. I mean, I'll give you another example. Is like, I mean, one thing we sort of suffered during the lockdown is because we couldn't go and meet people. We couldn't go and do our meetings in London and schmoozing with so on and so forth. And I realise now just how much I missed that, because that caused a big work drought for us. But also, when you meet people, even if there's not a particular project they've got at the time, which is suitable for you or not working else. I've seen that in their head, they're whirring around because they like spending time with you. They're trying to find something to work on with you down the line. Oh, I've got this is already sorted, but down the line I've got this in mind. You can work on this with us. But and again, it only happens because they like spending time with you and you've made the effort to go and see them. None of these things, in fact, out of my 3 things I mentioned, probably only half of one is about the ability to write music. The rest of it is nothing to do with the ability to write music. It's the ability to run a business. And ultimately, that's what we're doing. I'm going to get off my high horse now, and I'm going to let Chris have a go.
Thanks for all that, Andrew. I think the only thing that I would add to this conversation that hasn't been covered by everyone else is that I think that potentially finding an assistant position to a working composer is a good way to launch a career in the business. And if not launch a career, at least get a lot of experience and some chops and some credits that will perhaps help you get on your next game. I mean, a lot of times, you know, I've taken on interns and assistants in the past, and some of them I've continued to bring onto projects over and over again as either an additional music composer or an arranger or something like that. There's this one guy, Alex Williamson, who started out as my intern 15, 16 years ago, graduated to being my assistant, my additional music writer and composer. And nowadays I actually do a lot of co-scoring with him on a lot of different things. So that's just one way, mentorship, you know. And I think like it's not always easy to get those positions as an assistant. I mean, in the same way that every game company gets flooded with hundreds of composer demo reels, every assistant gets, or every composer gets flooded with hundreds of CVs and people looking to try to break into the business and things like that. So it's actually very hard to set yourself, you know, apart from the pack. And on top of that, you know, like, despite my best intentions, I only ever need 1 or 2 assistants at the most, occasionally 3, but it's not like we're constantly hiring. But at the same time, you know, getting out there, approaching established composers saying, hey, I'm very interested in working in games. You know, feel free, like, you know, like, would you need any help on anything? Do you need somebody to, you know, transcribe, you know, MIDI takedowns into Sibelius or Finale for you? You know, even things like that, right? Just finding your way into a working environment is really helpful. And, you know, ultimately, what you'll get out of that relationship is not necessarily your name as a co-composer on the game. It's very hard for the principal composers, such as myself, to actually put all of the things into place that will make happen getting, you know, co-writing credit as a principal composer on something. But often you'll get, you know, additional music credit or something like that you can go off and impress some indie developers with, you know, saying, oh, I did additional arrangements for Civilization 6, for example, right? And that can help you, you know, set yourself apart from the pack. So, I mean, look into that. I think that's a valuable way to try to break into the business.
Thank you for sharing all that. For this next question, I know Kerri mentioned it, so this question came up. If you only ever studied classical composition using real musicians, where do you recommend getting started in terms of A, sample libraries / getting your production really polished, and B, tech things like Wise and Fmod that are totally new words to you? So anyone can answer, but I know Kerri was the one that like brought it up. So
I did. Oh, well, I was a classically trained pianist, but actually I don't use a lot of real musicians because I don't have the funds or access. Like the most I've done was when in college where I could write for the orchestra there. So sample libraries are my wheelhouse if you want to talk. Oh wait, is it asking about sample?
Yeah, so if you where would you
Oh.
recommend them getting started if they wanted to do sample libraries or like on the tech side?
Well, I guess just do your research. They have a lot of like demos of the different sample libraries online so you can hear which one you like. I know like Spitfire, East West, the Vienna Symphonic. I don't use that one, but I heard that one's good too. If anyone else has any ideas.
Berlin, Cinesamples,
Yeah.
8DO. You know, there are a lot of really good sample
yeah.
libraries out there, and just sort of spoiled for choice these days. You know, the only thing that I would say is don't fall down this obsessive rabbit hole of just wanting to acquire everything. I think there's such a thing as the digital scrap heap. You can just buy plugins for days on end, and every manufacturer is going to convince you that you absolutely need their mezzo forte, legato, you know, piccolo library, right? You know, everyone's got something that they're going to push, and you can waste a lot of money on a lot of samples. Better to buy one set and really get good at polishing what you can do with that one set.
Awesome. Any advice for someone who wants to move from shifting a career for producing for record labels and film studios to video games?
I would say for me, it's the simple answer, the technical ability. I've had this a few times where I've been contacted by composers because we do know a fair amount of stuff in film and TV, and they say, "Oh, talk about games." And I'm honest, I think actually sometimes people say, "Why do you tell them?" Because it's your competition. Actually, I'm happy to tell them because I prefer them to have the reality of what they think, because some people have the idea of what composing games is, and I'm happy to sort of like maybe not break the spell, but it's. And I go into great detail. And to be fair, most of them, if they're not technical, they just go, no way. I didn't have any clue that that's what it involved. So I guess, I mean, we've already talked about the fact that this is the beauty of today's world. You can do a Wise course for free. You can download Wise; it's completely free, and you can say, okay, you can even mix. You can even put it with Unity or Unreal. You can just sit there and literally go, I've got a guy running around in a nice environment, and he goes into a cave. I can have music outside the cave, music inside the cave. What happens there? Oh, he gets a boss. I can have when he gets all of that you can completely do for free. So my advice is, if you want to get it, if you want to transfer your skills, well, obviously you're a producer, so clearly your ability to use sequence and everything else, and mixing, mastering, and composition and theory are great, but it's breaking it down to how do I apply that to a game. Also, I would say the one thing I've noticed in the past is that some people say to me, this it's a slightly hard thing to say to people. It's the difficult thing of moving away from what you like to compose to what they want to hear. The amount of people I've been contacted and say, here's my tracks, can I put this in the game? I went, what kind of game would listen to that kind of music? It's not really relevant. So of course, I mean, obviously modern production skills in records, brilliant, but it depends what kind. Is the game going to require an orchestra? How good are you with sample libraries? How good are you with transcribing, orchestrating, and doing all of that stuff? So it's all about making sure that the skill set you have in the composition area matches the kind of things you're going for. So for me, that's just as important as your ability to produce great sounding music. Is I need to stem it all. I need to figure out how to put it all into Wise so it scripts itself. So I can sit there and I can take, and I've only got a limited amount of memory. So this player's running around an environment for 10 minutes. How do I make my 30 megabytes of available stuff, work script beautifully so it never hears the same thing? So it's a constantly evolving piece of music. All that stuff is out there, and you can do that in Wise, and you can do that in Fmod. So so the ability to do that is it's brilliant. It's all there. It's all out there for you to have a go. But I suppose the question is, are you asking about how do I get into it, or are you asking about how much skills do you want to transfer? I'm kind of slightly.
Do you want to get into briefly about both, like how?
Both sides. So of course, so the two sides, making sure that the music you're writing is appropriate for the game. Dance track is brilliant, but it's not going to be that relevant for many games. So how good are you at scoring sound to picture? That's one thing I was very surprised about, is I never would have thought that scoring games would get me into film. I always thought it'd be the other way around, but actually the ability to learn to write music to picture largely prescribed from the fact that I was originally starting on doing long FMV sequences of cut scenes, which were all completely linear. and that ability to learn how to write music. And I was having some tuition from people who'd worked with film composers as to how to ride, the emotional narrative of a scene and how to read it and working in the other sounds, which was something which I knew nothing about. But that's effectively now it's now led me into besides a separate career in scoring film and TV stuff. So the side from that is the ability to write music to picture, which is very different than writing records, by the way. That's something I've learned the hard way. But then the other side is, as we've saw, as everyone here has alluded to, it's going and getting off your arse and going to meet every game developer you possibly can, becoming an assistant and everything else. I've talked too much. Someone else take over.
I think the
Go ahead.
question how to actually get into the industry. I think maybe Kerri should answer that, because you didn't intern. Did you intern, or how did you get your first gig? Maybe that would be.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still fairly new compared to all of you, but I did I've just been trying to contact everyone. I do research to like see the studios that I want to contact, try to find who's in charge, send like an email with a demo reel. I sent a few. I got like one response probably out of all of them. And they actually gave me some feedback on my reel, which was even better. So yeah, just like keep making yourself known to people, or like if I meet someone through a mutual friend or anything, I'll remember it's like, okay, I should follow up with them just to see if because they might forget you, but then if you reach out to them, they'll be like, oh yeah, I remember you, or like they appreciate I think they appreciate when you keep making yourself known. Also just like working on your music, like most of them, like you have to show something. You can't just say, oh, I know how to do this, I have these skills, I can play this. But then if you don't have any thing for them to hear, it's very hard for someone that doesn't know you to take your word. So that's my experience. I remember like during the pandemic, there was one application where they didn't even want a resume, or like they didn't want you to explain your whole experience. They just wanted one audio sample, because there's like so many applications to them. They like cycle through all the samples, and then they will follow up on the ones where they're like, hey, can you like write a sample specifically for us now? So I thought that was a cool concept. But then I was also very glad that I had a sample that I wrote before that would actually work for this application. So just keep writing and keep reaching out to people. I'm sure Twitter is a good place to find indie game developers.
I will jump in and say one other thing is that if you have experience, if you've done a game, I can possibly help, because I mentioned before that I run a mailing list. I started the mailing list in 1998. So I've now got 800 game audio people on this mailing list worldwide. You can't join the mailing list unless you have done a title under your belt and you write a bio from anything else. But once you're on there. I send out a members list. It's got everyone's email address, and it's got the majority of all the main game developers all over the shop with all their audio directors. And so I know from my perspective, it's helped me get loads of work. So and it's like anything else, it's about connecting people, and that's why I started it. So I'm happy to help if everyone.
I want to join this mailing list.
Send me an email, barn@bobandbarn.com.
Thank you. Deep connections, right?
I have a question, because I think that I think what they want to hear, people who are interested in bringing into games, would be something like, in performing arts world, there's conferences they can go to. Do they have that for film composers, right? Or I'm sorry, game composers.
Yes, they do. There's Game SoundCon run by Brian Schmidt, which I think is in September. I forget when it is. There are various audio talks on the GDC audio track. Over here in the UK, you have the Develop Conference, which is probably because a lot of the games conferences, the games are like trade shows, they've all stopped. You haven't got me, obviously in America you've got E3, which has just happened. I think it's mostly virtually now, but there are, exactly that. For me, that's the prime way to go and get a meeting with everyone is to go and just go and mingle, go and have a drink at the bar with some people you never know who you're going to chat to.
I will say this. I'm going to jump in here and say I have noticed in recent years that it seems like there is an overwhelming number of composers trying to get gigs, so much so that people have even made a meme out of it. Do you need a composer? I've seen t-shirts that say DYNAC. Do you need a composer, right? And it's just this joke, not only in the game world, but in the film world, everywhere, that there's just a bazillion composers running around desperately trying to get on any sort of like production. So much so that it's like composers have sort of become the least valued member of the team in a lot of ways, just because, you know, there are just so many people ready and willing. I mean, if you want to see this phenomenon for yourself, like join, you know, some sort of video game development group where, you know, every once in a while somebody says, hey, you know, indie game studio here, we need a composer. Anyone got any reels? And you'll see hundreds of people saying, yeah, here's my website, here's my whatever. You really need to find a way to set yourself apart from that. And so going to these conferences like GDC, E3, Game Sound Con, you know, they're good. You can meet people and network with them. And if you're particularly good at schmoozing, hey, you're gonna have a lot of success doing this, right? Not all of us are particularly eloquent, articulate, schmoozy, you know, not everyone is good at that. You have to find other ways to set yourself apart. If, for example, you can find your way onto speaking on any sort of panel, which you happen to have some sort of like expertise on, you know, that's a way to get your name in front of every single attendee at that conference without, you know, like, and you know, everyone here has alluded to the fact that the more times people hear your name or see your name printed, the more familiar they are with you and the more likely they actually are to hire you, because they think in the back of their head, oh, I've heard that person. I'm going to give their demo reel special consideration, right? If you can find some way to speak on one of these panels, whether it be, you know, on the technical side, or perhaps on, you know, the cultural side, or, you know, even speaking on a panel about diversity in the game industry, because diversity is a very hot topic across all of the sort of entertainment arts right now. That's a good thing to do, you know? The other thing I'd mention is that some conferences like the GDC, at least they used to have demo derbies where you can kind of sign up and, you know, for 3 hours, like basically a room full of 100 attendees gets to play, you know, 1 minute of audio from their demo reel or whatever for a panel of people. And if you have some really standout music, you can really get a lot of attention that way. One of my earliest experiences at GDC, the first GDC I went to was after I'd written Baba Yetu for Civilization 4. And so I went to the GDC panel, this demo derby, and I didn't know anyone in the games industry. Like, I was just a random fluke that happened to write this song. And I played that song for the demo derby. Like the panelists included Chuck Dowd from Sony, who was head of music at Sony, Steve Schnurr from EA, right, head of music at EA, Jack Wall, Tommy Tallarico, Bob Rice, who was a very notable game composer agent back at the time. And afterwards, they all came up to me and handed me their cards and said, hey, let's talk. You know, maybe we can work together, right? So if you have a really, really good piece of music that you think is going to turn some heads, don't be afraid to get it out there and do things like this demo derby, right? Because you might just get some pretty amazing connections out of it.
I can't agree with you more. I mean, it's a different kind of route that different field that we're in, but you know, the way we got to Opus 3 and then touring internationally came out of this basically like an incubator thing for performing arts ensembles and nonprofits. And then we weren't even going to do the incubator. We thought that, okay, well, we're good enough to kind of like do this showcase, but obviously we didn't get it for this like big regional conference. And then they actually reached out to us saying that, hey, like you didn't get it, but you almost did, but we're going to do this incubator thing. Do you want to be part of it for free? And we're like, yeah. And we met a bunch of people. And then like we ended up presenting at this thing called ISPA, which is like a, you know, about 300, 400 big agents and, you know, presenting organizations gather in New York, like I think every 6 months. They move around, but the main one is in New York. So we ended up presenting as part of this thing called Pitch New Works. They select 10 pieces. And like we made up this thing, which is now finally kind of like about to be realized with, we did a beta version in San Francisco, but now we're gonna try to do that in Toronto, actually, with Toronto Symphony. And that presentation in front of all these people changed everything, because it was just an idea. It was like a startup thing. You know, we just had this idea, and then they were like, wow, that sounds great. And then, you know, the Opus 3 VP, who is our agent now, came up to us. So I think it's important to sort of think of this as a business. And then, you know, it's very similar to software business, because you're creating a content that can sort of travel, and as long as you own the IP, you can get money from it, and you can actually do a lot of stuff by being good at programming or, you know, writing music, right? So, and if people who want to get into game music and they don't know the know-how, I would say treat it like, you know, you're not a technical founder, but you can find a technical founder as long as you have a great vision. I mean, look at Steve Jobs. He wasn't like the greatest inventor. He just like put things together. He basically worked as like a producer. So you can think of it that way. And I think that thinking of it as startup and then going to a place there where you can actually be the monopoly of it, which is what Christopher actually said. You know, if you go to a place where everybody's competing for one job, you're going to get crushed. So that's called the red ocean, blue ocean strategy. So Peter Thiel talked about it too. Peter Thiel is this founder who did PayPal, right? So he basically said that competition is for losers, right? So you have to think about your own lane and then publicize it. And then get to the leverage any kind of success that you have, and then go to next level.
I think that's fantastic. Actually, I love that approach. I've always espoused the be an artist, cultivate your artistic voice, and you know, promote it so that people come looking to you for what it is that you already do best, rather than you throwing in, you know, your reel with the 300 other people all trying to vie for the same job, right? I think, you know, it's sort of like the law of attraction, right? You just make yourself more attractive as somebody that will want to come to you. If you are not, for example, implementation savvy like I am, this is a strategy that I think might particularly work well for you. If you come from another aspect of the music business, like being a record producer, I mean, you know, lean on those record producer credentials, right? I mean, Daniel Lanois co-scored Red Dead Redemption 2. I really don't think he knows how to work with Wise or Fmod, right? He's a record producer and an amazing one. And he leaned on that to get that gig. Or rather, people sought him out because of all his work with Emmylou Harris and, you know, all these other Americana artists, right? To piggyback on what JooWan said, I mean, Opus 3, by the way, is a great agency. So congratulations to you for working with them. Get your music out there, like play, you know, if you are a performing artist, for example, and I think some of the people who might be tuning into this actually come from other musical worlds other than game scoring. I mean, yeah, do showcases if you can, you know, or like, honestly, there might even be something to be said for, you know, playing a coffee house in the vicinity of E3, you know, in the evening after one of the conferences gets out, you know, or playing in a bar or something like that, right? I mean, there might even be something to be said for that approach. The problem is, like, when you run the rat race against 300 other people, especially if you're breaking into this business, it's almost guaranteed that somebody is going to have a better list of credentials than you are that's trying to get that gig. And that's going to be a lifelong problem. Like, even once you start amassing these credentials, there's still going to be a Hans Zimmer competing for a gig that you're competing for, you know, or something like that, right? It's never going to stop. But if you cultivate a voice and get it out there and publish it and really become known for that particular sound and being that type of composer and that type of person, you can attract people to come to you. Most of my game work is not anything that I actually went and looked for. It's stuff that where people heard my music and said, you know, maybe Chris is the right guy for our game, and so they come to me, right? And honestly, it's better for the creative soul that way for me personally, because I don't know about the rest of my fellow panelists out here, but I've certainly submitted a lot of demos for films, TV shows, and games that have gone nowhere. And every time that happens, a little part of my creative soul dies, you know, a horrible flaming death, because I've just been rejected. And I hate rejection. I hate it, right? So in a way, if there's another avenue that you can imagine or one that's open to you where you become the attractive product and people hire you because they want your name on the box of their game, pursue that.
Anyone have anything else to add?
Well, I just want to say I love rejections. Just
You get used to it
Good
at
for
some
you.
point.
I hate them. I hate them.
I hate them. I hate them. They do. I totally agree with Chris. You know, we've had, yeah, probably every 1 in 10 jobs we asked to pitch on, and you get them, but the other 9, you just, like you say, it's gut wrenching when you don't get it, and especially from the last few that we have lost. We've got up, we've got, sometimes it's been 10, sometimes it's been 20, sometimes it's been 3. We've always got to the last 2 and never won it. And sadly, in this world, there's no silver medal. That's it. That's it. So like you go, oh, it's like, I'm not sure that helps me to know that I came in the top 2 every time. It makes me feel good some degree because I've beaten the other however many people, but still, we still lost it. So, and in fact, recently they couldn't decide. This is for a film. They couldn't decide, so they had an interview with us. But actually, fun enough, the interview, they hadn't sent us, this for a film. They hadn't actually sent us anything else other than this 10-minute clip of the film to do the demo for. And they wanted to talk to us about how we would score the rest of the film. But we haven't seen the script. We haven't seen anything else from it. So we had no idea really what was expected from us. And sadly, we obviously didn't say the right thing because the guy when it did. And that was only last week. But I was, I found that very frustrating because I was like, what, those kind of things, you have no idea what you've done wrong. But because we didn't have any other context, no script in the house, we literally this sliver of this film, we had no idea. We thought we'd said the right thing, but clearly we didn't. So c'est la vie. But I think anything else, a part of this business is obviously, dealing with rejection is sadly part of the daily life.
Well, since we're at the end of our panel, and instead of ending on dealing with rejection, my final question is, what are some of your proudest works that you've done? And it doesn't have to be limited to video games, but just anything that you would say is like your number one, either your proudest works or something that you just like really enjoyed doing in your career. And then also where people can follow you if they wanted to follow you online. We can do Kerri, JooWan, Barn, and Christopher again.
I guess, well, some of my proudest works are like the ones that I'm working on right now, so they're to be released. But then also, I was very proud when I created like a chamber, like a small chamber orchestral arrangement of some animated films that I did back in college for my recital, and then I also incorporated like all the world music instruments, but because that was like a lot of notating and stuff that I was getting a little lazy using digital DAWs and stuff. But what was the other question? How to follow me? I don't have a lot of social media accounts. I guess I lack there, but you can go to my website. It's kerrishak.com. And you can email me there if you have any questions.
Okay, so obviously the proudest work that I have is my group. We are actually so this thing that we're developing now, and then we did the beta version of, is basically a modular performing arts project that has chamber orchestra, hip hop MCs, and hip hop dancers, and then we go to different kind of metropolitan area and then work with the talent there. So it's kind of like, it sounds disgusting, but like McDonald's in Beijing will have kanji. So this is the idea of having the kind of ethos of what we have, but incorporating the elements of the local sort of pathos. So, and the second question would be, well, where you can find me. So you can find me at Miknauj, which is my name spelled backwards, in Facebook. Yeah, Facebook. We use Facebook a lot. So there you go.
Okay, moving on to me. About my proudest works. it is a good question. Well, I suppose the questions stuff which I'm most well known for in the 90s. It was definitely some Amiga stuff. Then I was on the PlayStation. I worked on Frogger. If anyone remembers Frogger, 23rd best-selling PlayStation 1 game of all time, randomly, and I scored that. Then I worked on things like Gran Turismo racing games, Gran Turismo, Sega Rally, and Forza. And actually, one of my proudest moments was a game called Brink, which was the first-person shooter we did 10 years ago, because it mixed all of our stuff. I like the fact that Kerri talked a lot about ethnic stuff. We discovered that we loved mixing world music with orchestras and all that. That's what I mean. As again, Chris said it before, it's the most creative field in the game industry because you seem to be a lot more. It seems to be a lot more open to ideas. So for this particular game, it was a first-person mingle shooter. So four players kind of working together as a team. We mixed, the lead designer was a percussionist, actually went on percussion tours. And he said, I want to do the entire game in percussion. And I said, well, it's a mingle player shoot 'em up. You're not going to hear, how's that going to mix with all the sound design? It's not going to work. So, but we ended up recording 5 hang drums, tuban vocals, 4 Chinese instruments, erhu, pipa, and gouging, and that lot, a full orchestra, tuban vocals, and a load of electronics. So that was quite a fun thing to do. One of our most proudest moments was we were the first people to record an orchestra for a Sony game, and that was in 2002 for a game called Primal. Was the first time we recorded. We opened the door for Eastern European cost-effective recording for games, which at the time was they'd never done it before. A game called Primal, which was the same guy. I suppose the game that we get most noise about, most comments from, was a series of games called MediEvil for the PlayStation. We've scored 4 of those since 1998, and in fact the last one came out in 2019 for the PS4. And that was an interesting project because it was a remake of a game with to take a non-interactive synthesized orchestral score, updated for 2019 to make it interactive and completely live. But yet keep the same essence from the original 1998 game, because you realise there was those melodies that everyone seemed to love and revere from the original, but so you couldn't muck around too much with it. But hopefully in 20 years of writing with orchestras, we kind of learned a little bit more about orchestration. So sometimes I cringe it and go, oh my God, did I do that? That was a horrible kind of arrangement. But again, just have the top melody, but everything else underneath was completely redid. And we just spent, I think we spent 50 hours with an orchestra recording ridiculous amounts of everything was done completely stems, even to the point where we were recording strings and brass and all sections, legato stuff and rhythmic stuff all separately. So it was an immense implementation nightmare to try and keep that going. And then we did a game called Kung Fu Chaos in 2003 for the original Xbox, which was the first time we explored recording ethnic instruments, which was something else. So a number of things. I would say we're probably most well known for the scores for MediEvil, but I would say that's we like recording orchestras. We like mixing that shit up with other stuff, because why not? You can do it here and nowhere else. That's probably about the size of me. But actually, sorry. One thing I was going to say is that since then as well, we have, as I said before, we've opened up the door for recording into film and TV, which has been a fabulous thing. But I never really thought that. So there's a TV show which has just aired earlier in the year on the US called on the CW channel called Dead Pixels, which it's a classic game because it's a mixture of guys who spend their time in a fictional MMO world called Kingdom Scrolls. So it was a perfect mixture of our stuff. And we had our first documentary release on Netflix about 2 weeks ago called Hating Peter Tatchell, which was an interesting project because we had to record a string section last year in lockdown, so everyone recorded individually, which was a fucking nightmare. But fun thing to do. And we just scored our first rom-com, which was in the cinemas in the UK the last couple of weeks. Again, all of this from scoring games. I never would have thought it, but I love it. That's me done.
I guess I'll wrap this up. I really enjoyed meeting you all, by the way, fellow panelists, and hearing your aspects of the industry, your stories from the industry from various angles. Probably, I got to go with the easy answer here. My accomplishment in the game industry that I am the most proud of is probably having written Baba Yetu for Civilization 4. That song actually went on to win a Grammy Award several years after it was released, when I reissued the song on my debut album. And that became the first time a piece of video game music had ever actually won a Grammy Award. And so suddenly there was a lot more interest in the legitimacy of game music from the recording industry side. And actually the subsequent, 2 years later, or the year after even, I think, they renamed their visual media category to include video games into one of the, to popularize video games as an eligible entry into soundtracks for Grammy consideration. So Baba Yetu has done wonders for my career. I mean, it's achieved all sorts of crazy accolades and weird honors in the world. It was a question on Jeopardy last year, for example. 2-3 years ago, it was actually played in the background of a peace accord signing in Mozambique. It gets played at the UN regularly. I mean, many times a year, actually, by their in-house chamber music ensemble. I've conducted it myself all around the world, from Carnegie Hall to, Lincoln Center. I mean, it's one of these things that's kind of gone all around the world. It's become one of the top-selling pieces of sheet music, choral sheet music, certainly, for my previous publishers, Alfred Publishing, and for Hal Leonard as well. It was one of these pieces that I gotta say, like, really remade my career in a very, very big way. And it was a piece that I spent a lot of time writing. And this goes back to sort of my idea that to write a really great piece of music it's worth more than writing 100 okay pieces of music. You'd rather write one big hit than 100 other pieces that just kind of disappear, with the years. So, I guess that I have to acknowledge was a big turning point for me, and I think it's been great. Now I think we're in a world now where a lot of people are starting to look towards video game music, video game composers, and video game culture as a juggernaut of media, of entertainment, right? I mean, you have record labels now actively courting people to sign them. I mean, I think Inan Zur, colleague of all of ours, signed with Sony, I believe. I signed with Universal. I know Universal was interested in Bear McCreary. There's a lot more interest now in what game composers can do in other aspects of the industry. And especially if you have a voice and a following, I think you'll find that a lot of people will seek you out because they want you as the artist on their project or on their label or their roster. So I think it's a very, very exciting time to be a game composer with a lot of opportunity out there.
Isn't that?
Awesome. Okay, so everyone, thank you for attending. You can see, or you can follow up with everyone at kerrishak.com, mcnawuj.com, bobandbarn.com. Did I get that right, Barn?
You did.
Awesome. And then christophertin.com. Thank you all for coming out and sharing your knowledge and wisdom with everyone. I am especially excited because a lot of the things that you said can be applied to both composing and then other things outside of composing. But thank you everyone for coming, and I hope everyone has a good afternoon and a good evening for you, Barn.
Yes, thank you so much for having us.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Nice meeting you all.